What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist 8 Astrology. Justin here, and are you ready to get into the Celestial News Monthly, which is a monthly show that goes over the astrology from the perspective of the sun and the other traditional planets, what signs they ingress into, when they happen to go retrograde, or there happens to be an eclipse, or whenever they were talking about any sort of planetary configurations. We go over all that good stuff here on the Celestial News Monthly. And I will say that May feels a lot smoother than April was. Now, there's not to say that there's still some hard aspects here. We have one at the beginning of the month with Mars and Jupiter that are going to be happening. And then towards the end of the month, after Venus moves into Cancer, there's going to be a square that's going to happen between Venus and Saturn. That's going to be a bit that'll kind of punctuate that month there. But in between that period of time, there's a lot of the sextiles that are going to be happening. They're like a notable amount of them, and we're going to get into navigate this whole month here in a moment. Now, if you want to support the work that I do further, down in the description box, there's a link to book, or there's a link for my Patreon page, and I have a couple tiers on there, and that'll give you access to the monthly show that I do on there, as well as a personalized monthly transit report for me. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely go check that out. But before we jump into the charts here and I kind of break the transits down one at a time, I'm going to switch over to the calendar here, where we will get just to get a lay of the land and kind of see what May has to bring. Because we're starting off with a pretty harmonious aspect. We have on the first, Venus is going to sextile Saturn on the first, and then we'll have our ingress of Mercury into the domicile of Venus, Taurus, on the second of May. Then on the 4th, we have that square that I was talking about with Mars and Jupiter that's going to be going down. That'll be our first hard aspect of the month. And then we go kind of this week of where some sextiles are building up, and very positive ones, because now Mercury's catching up with the sun after its station retrograde. So now we have the sun that's going to form a harmonious aspect with Big Papa. Mercury's going to do one with Big Papa, and then those two are going to meet up and talk about it. Yeah, talk about it and say how lovely that was. Because what an experience, what a nice little passage to go through, and especially for Mercury, because we'll have that Cazimi, the Mercury conjunct Sun, on the 14th there, and then after all that loveliness, Mercury gets to go home. It gets to enter into its home of Gemini on the 17th, and we have it's going to be a pretty ingress heavy period of time. A lot of stuff that we're going to be shifting to, a lot of charts, things that we're going to look in our own personal chart to see how the signs aspect the different maybe time lords in our charts. But we have that on the 17th, and then on the 18th, that's a jam-packed day. Mars moves into Taurus, Venus moves into Cancer, and those two have a nice harmonious aspect there. They have a sextile that happens on the 18th as well, so that's a nice even little spot there that's happening. On the 20th, we enter into Gemini season, so that'll be something that we'll talk about. And then the 22nd, we have Mercury that's going to form a sextile with Saturn, so even that's a pretty harmonious one there. And then we end the week, which is again kind of a bit of a harsher one there, will be where Saturn is going to Venus will form a square with Saturn, and that'll be the last hard aspect that we'll have for that month, or for the month of May. So that's pretty much to get just pretty much a lay of the land here. Now let me go ahead and get my chart up there. There we go. Get myself all situated. So let's talk about break down the different aspects one at a time and really kind of dissect this a bit. Because like I said, on the 1st of May, Venus is going to form a sextile with Saturn, and that's going to happen at about 11:45 a.m. Pacific time. And when you think about the sextile here, that's when the celestial bodies are 60 degrees apart from one another. The sextiles were thought to be a more harmonious aspect. They're weaker than the trine, the most positive one, but they still are something that I'd like to think that if you put a little bit more of initiative into, they create these opportunities for some good stuff to happen. So this could be, let's say, on a personal level. You think about, I was kind of thinking about this I think of the solitary aspect of Saturn and that creative aspect of Venus. This could be a great time to do some, maybe take some alone time, take some time to work on some creative endeavors. Whether that be maybe do happen to do some sculpting where you can see some, where you may be making some music. I could see this as a period of time where maybe someone happens to start something. We could see maybe some new music that's potentially coming out there, maybe even something that breaks the mold a little bit, something that kind of stands out there, something that brings maybe more of those kind of Saturnian influences in there. I think of the artists like Lana Del Rey, for example, that sort of who could bring in that sort of melancholy of Saturn and present it in a very Venusian sort of way. That would be an example of how I could see that. Or I actually saw something really, I just read something today or yesterday when I'm recording this is the 20th when I'm recording this, and I was reading this thing in the New York Times. I was talking about these art, or not, these fashion shows, we're having these models that were 50 and older, and I thought that was so cool. What a way to fuse those two energies together to bring out the beauty of aging, to see that, to appreciate the wisdom and the maturity that was part of that, to put that into the respect that it deserves, as opposed to looking at it as some sort of like where you're discarded and out of style there. So that could be even where we see maybe even some sort of like vintage thing maybe coming back there, some sort of like a, gives me like a, maybe like an old fashioned sort of feel, but something that's brought into popularity, that's got into a new spin, some sort of like maybe quote unquote innovation, but we're really taking from an old and redoing it, breathing, giving some new life into it, So that could be something that could potentially happen there. Maybe we could see, maybe this could be where maybe a prominent female figure comes into and comes into some sort of like authority or something like that. We see some kind of rise in the ranks that kind of step into the position. I think about Saturn, who can bring in that sense of the can bring in that sense of promotion and thinks of it can bring someone into like a distinguished position. So that could even be something where, again, some kind of prominent female or some sort of, again, maybe art that happens to be on some kind of display, something like that. Some maybe hear about some new artist or some kind of new styles of music that's on the scene, arts on the scene, plays, things along those lines. That could even be an opportunity too, where I could see even for some kind of trade, some stuff in the market. Saturn deals with like seafaring things, so maybe some things with trade happens to happen. Maybe there's even like some openings with like different opportunities for business. I would think about Venus as sort of that giving of gifts. It bestows the office of like supervisors, or can deal with like, again, like the markets and factories and things. So maybe we see different shops that are opening up there, different roles that are potentially coming up, ways for to promote some sort of like activity, trade, things along like that. I could see that could be another potential thing that we could maybe see as those, as this is especially to Venus going through Gemini, some sort of maybe innovative sort of ideas, that are happening with this. So that could be some things that could potentially come up there. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that Venus with Saturn. Now let me pull up the next one here, which we're going to talk about. Next aspect here is Mercury in Taurus. And if you're watching the video version here, I have the chart that I'm gonna be guiding you there, that I'm moving through. I have my software up here, and I have each of the charts pulled up there as we're talking about it. So now, on the second, Mercury is going to move into Taurus at about 7:56 p.m. Pacific time. If you want to know to the second, it's 57 seconds. This thing is like, it's dead. I'll let you know to the millisecond, probably. But this is where, when we get a new planet that moves into a different sign of our house, we want to get the lay of the land for Mercury. So when we think on a personal level, you want to see where you have Taurus in your chart. What topic is Taurus associated for you? Does Taurus aspect any time lords that are activated for you? So I'll give you an example. I have Leo rising, and this actually will work for this chart too, but I have Leo rising, and Mercury is actually one of the Time Lords that is activated for me, and so I'm gonna watch all of. Cause and this is and Taurus is a pretty busy part of my chart because other than my Moon, it aspects my Sun, it aspects Saturn, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, my ascendant, my midheaven. So this is gonna be a busy time for Mercury, and that's gonna happen in my 10th house. So I'm thinking about the things that I'm doing, ways that I'm advancing, that I'm how what I managed to think about as far as like success and things, what relationships maybe I need to type of form there. So there's a lot that I'm gonna be that's gonna be a busy one when when Mercury gets there. But I'm ultimately looking forward to it. That'll be I think some things will get. I plan on getting a lot of things done during that period of time for sure, making the most of that, and that could be some ways of working with of anticipating how that's going to be in your chart. Is that going to be how active? Because I know that those squares with like Saturn and Mars may be a little bit more kind of tenser times. They're a little more forceful, but there's also that stuff with the benefics too. So I like that, and that can be a helpful way of navigating how Mercury is going to go through your chart personally there. But when we look at the kind of lay of the land for Mercury on just a more kind of a mundane sort of sense, Mercury it's finally out of that co-presence with Mars and Saturn, so that's going to ease up on those mercurial significators of that. When you think about some of the Mercury stuff like trade, it could do like communications, that idea of like miscommunications, the fire in the mind, that maybe kind of forcefulness that was coming from Mars and that from Saturn, that secretness, that deceptiveness, that's kind of easing up a bit. And now Mercury is going to even just kind of looking over the month here, it's like I said, it's going to form a sextile with Jupiter. It's going to form a conjunction with the Sun. So that's all the aspects that it's going to complete it's in while it's in Taurus. But it's a nice little break from what it was doing when it was first really slow in Pisces, and then it's been going through one moment for as I'm recording this right now, Mercury is technically besieged by the malefics. So Mercury hasn't been in the best shape for a while. So this Taurus should feel like a bit of ease that is coming from that. Now it's in aversion to Venus, its domicile lord. So that's a bit tricky. Venus doesn't necessarily see, even though they're in each other's, there's a sort of reception there that they're in each other's domiciles, but they still don't technically see each other. So there's a bit like I don't feel like it's all of those problems that Mercury, that was caused while Mercury was in Aries. I don't think they're necessarily all going to be relieved, but there's at least a bit of a salve when Mercury will form that sextile with Jupiter. It may be something where it's almost like if you were to imagine when they thought about a planet being in a domicile. It's like you have your own place and you're not able to get with the landlord to fix whatever it is that you need. So you kind of have to figure that leak out yourself. You gotta work with the resources that you have, and that's kind of what Mercury is doing in here. At least it's in the house of a benefic. Venus is not doing that bad. It's not being seen by Jupiter, but at least it's got like Venus is okay. It's got a little bit of got a bit of bounds in Gemini, so it's not doing bad. Mercury, same thing. It's got some placements or some blots or bounds in Taurus. So at least a little bit there. Mercury's not doing too bad here, but it's not necessarily like it's not excelling like it will once it gets into Gemini and it's feeling at home here. So that's some things to think about when we're thinking about the more kind of mercurial aspects, what to look for in a personal sense with this. But I definitely think that this is a more positive place for Mercury to be in, those Mercury significators, especially since it's getting out of that malefic party that Mars was throwing in its for its return to its home. So that's something to think about with that one. Now we got to talk about the first hard aspect that's going to be happening, and that's going to be with Mars squaring Big Papa. Now that's going to happen on the 4th of May, and that's going to happen at about 7:08 p.m. Pacific time. Now, the square aspect is when when the planets are 90 degrees apart from one another, and it was thought to be this adverse aspect. It was a hard aspect, and this is one in particular is has its challenges, because when you think the squares are unique in how there's these left-sided squares and then right-sided squares. Like with Mars being on the right side of Jupiter, that means that Mars is in the superior position. And so those martial qualities are going to, and you could think in a sense, are going to kind of dominate the Jupiterian significators. And Jupiter is one of the benefics that's bringing that's indicative of life, that's indicative of children and childbearing, of friendships with great people, the ranks and crowns and zeal and authorities over temples and trust and abundance, all those things. But then Martial Mars comes down and is takes all the abundance. It snatches that up. It'll vandalize. It's a loss of properties, the things that are impeding on all of that. A simple example would be like how the stuff Mars dealing with, like wars, how wars can deal with the abundance. We can't grow anything because everything is being destroyed. That could be an example where we're seeing those kind of challenges there. How can we bring some sort of resolve into that? The martial quality is really kind of hammering down on that. And so that's could be that's something where this gives me an aspect of making sure to just have everyone, like, have your ducks in a row. Like it, when you think of like Jupiter as far as like inheritance, what you believe, what you're going to leave behind, and the things that you kind of the good things that you receive, it's how do we store that stuff up for a rainy day when Mars happens to come through there. It reminds me when there's like back when I lived in Indiana, when you would have these like pounds, I mean, well, yeah, pounds of snow, just about feet of snow that would come up, and you couldn't get out. Maybe your cars were too cold. You couldn't start. The streets weren't plowed. All of these things, and so you kind of had to make do with what you had, with with the resources that you had, knowing that abundance is coming, but it has to get through these obstacles. Is what I see this square that's kind of coming through, because Jupiter is kind of getting it right now. It's not necessarily going to complete a square with Saturn, but it's still in that aspect. It still has that testimony. There's still these sort of long-term Saturnian consequences that are happening, even if we may not see them to its peak. They've already had their squares previously, but yeah, this one feels like there could be this. Imagine it's like quarrels amongst friends. This is you have these great people in your life, and then something comes in and breaks that apart. All of a sudden this stuff is like irreconcilable, irreconcilable. See if I can talk, but that's what that kind of gives me there. It's not the most pleasant aspect. This could be someone falling out of favor in some sort of degree. Someone maybe that had some sort of authority, that had some sort of rate that was kind of brought down there. So that could be something that happens. But if I'm going to talk about, there's still Jupiter that's in the mix, and if there was going to be maybe some kind of positive from this, is someone maybe rising up out of these challenges. To maybe people coming together to fight this gives me where when we have these sort of like catastrophes and things like that, how you'll have people like, let's say, like the different sources, like I think about people who like volunteer, or maybe like we're doing some like work at like churches, or doing something with like Doctors Without Borders, or those sort of like people that just go out and do those things to try to be that good in the world, that try to do that. So, that's something that they can give to that, maybe some sort of rise out of that, from this sort of martial thing. But it does feel like Mars is that like things under difficult circumstances and under pressure and stuff. So definitely more of a trickier one that we're kind of navigating when we're dealing with that Mars square. But then once we get through that, let me pull up the next one here, because then we have Jupiter's going to be in the spotlight here for a bit, because then we have the sun that's going to form a sextile with with Big Papa, and that's going to happen on the 10th of May. That's going to happen at about 7:13 p.m. Pacific time. And when you think about the sun coming with with Jupiter, this is would be that because the sun dealing with like that sense of leadership. For example, both Jupiter and the sun are you're dealing with like people of prominence, people in authority, of high rank, and so this could be that band that's coming to the Justice League coming together to try to try to stop some of these martial forces that are happening. Even kind of tying it in, I don't want to get too ahead of myself because that's going to kind of tie nicely into the Mercury thing. But this could be that like how do we present these talks? Can someone for prominence or something along those lines on a larger scale bring that sense of justice, bring that sense of that relief from bondage that Jupiter promises there to come be that sort of savior. But it's like again, it's not that it seems like someone that's just going to, because who wants to take that on? You know, when you think about when things are under fire, I think it's easy to say that this is what needs to be done as opposed to when you have to be in that role and to actually execute those things. When you're trying to deal with a depending on what you're dealing with. I think about just like, let's say if a business is struggling, how to build that out from the ground, how to dig that up there. It takes someone who can restore that faith. How do we have faith in your vision, your sight, when it doesn't seem that strong right now, that doesn't seem that promising with the circumstances that are happening there. And I think even too with the sun kind of bringing some light into Jupiter, like that sextile there, that Jupiter where it does promise those big things, those great things, that stuff takes time. Jupiter is a slow, in the traditional sense, it's the second, second to the slowest moving planets after then Saturn being the slowest. And so Jupiter takes time. It takes a year for Jupiter to move through the zodiac signs and to do all of these things. And again, it depends on the condition that it's in. Jupiter hasn't been in a good condition while it's in a state of, it's in a sign of exaltation, which is lovely. It has that's going for you. But it's like, what does that matter when you got people throwing rocks at you? You got Saturn here and Mars here just constantly harassing. And so I think that just kind of brings into that there's a certain patience and a certain faith that we need to have in that. That's something that can come up there. But that gives me the opportunity for someone to rise to the ranks, to step up to the challenge, and again, to not do this by themselves, to find a team to tackle this stuff. This can bring a sense of, I think, a great way of bringing people together. And let me go ahead and pull up the next aspect there, because that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I mean, these two tie in together so nicely, these transits, these next few transits here. Because then the next one on the 12th, at about 9:43 p.m. Pacific time, Mercury's going to form a sextile with Jupiter. And so this is that planning state, that conversations to, okay, these things have been happening, so how do we move the needle back in the other directions? We came out of April, so now how do April showers, where do we get these Mayflowers? to try to bring some sort of poetry in with Mercury being in Taurus. So that's something that could be something that could come up in the mix there. And even on like a personal sense, this could be where you can have those sort of ideas like this. This gives, when you think about Jupiter as that terms of like Gnostic knowledge, that's sort of like that connection with source, with divinity, with that higher, with the higher mind. That higher mind is connected with that human, like that sort of, I don't want to say lower mind, but with the human mind in a sense, that earthly mind as opposed to the terrestrial, as opposed to the divine mind. I'm thinking about that's the sort of distinction that I'm trying to make between these two. But there's an opportunity for there to be that connection where that divine comes through and has that inspiration. This could be where we see some sort of discoveries come through, some sort of like innovations where we're presented with the problem. Let's say I think about Jupiter, anything that is that's affecting life, how Mars may be affecting life in some sort of way. How can we be more efficient with the abundance that we have? Sometimes Jupiter is not just giving more, it's how to get what we have back in some shape. When the garden's not working well, we have to get it back, because then winter's going to be coming, to work in that metaphor. So that's what that gives me, a innovative way of maybe kind of working with the times, of having a different kind of conversation, maybe bringing in more peace, in a sense, hopefully on a grander scale. Again, I'm not trying to put too much weight on that, because it is the sextile, and it requires that initiative that can happen, that effort that can happen. But that could be something that we could potentially see that comes up there. Now, the next aspect that we're going to talk about is the conjunction with the Sun and Mercury. That's going to happen on the 14th of May at about 7:24 a.m. Pacific time. And when you think about the co-presence as a configuration, it's different from the sextile, the square, the trine, the opposition. This is where, because we're not necessarily seeing each other. This is a fusion, a co-mixture of the combinations, depending on what planets we're talking about here. In this, we're talking about the Sun, and we're talking about Mercury. And this gives me and especially on that, when we're working with that inspired sense, this gives me this feeling of that flash of inspiration, of when we focus on something, where we get that aha moment. That Kazemi is that fusion, where again, that almost like that direct line from the Sun, we can get some sort of divine wisdom, some sort of divine guidance, some sort of sense, some sort of, because Mercury was thought as the bestower of like a forethought and of intelligence, and we're tapping into, it's fusing with that divine mind. The mind is what that Mercury and the Sun, that those indicators kind of have in common. That we're thinking about that intelligence, regular intelligence versus a divine intelligence, that nature's fire fueling the mind in Taurus here. So there's something about that. If we taking those stages, could be where the ideas could be flowing a lot more. We could find some more focus, maybe happen. That could potentially happen. Maybe there's some sort of things that come with maybe some sort of clarity as far as like maybe where the market is going, for example. That could be something, because it's interesting, as the Sun, when a planet is coming into the beams of the Sun, it goes through this period where it's damaged when it's under the beams of the Sun, because you can't see those significator, maybe where things are going, how we're going to get those. That when we were talking about that Mercury sextile Jupiter, how was that happening? Because while that was building up, that was probably under the beams of the Sun. It would have been under the beams of the Sun while that was happening. So this could be where we may not have known how to get to that thing, and then that flash of insight comes through. And when we get to the Kazemi, because when it's within the degree of the Sun on either side, that was when it was thought to be in the heart of the Sun, where it was protected, where you were thought to have a seat next to basically sitting next to the throne, on the lap of the king. So that's something that maybe some sort of divine revelation kind of come. Maybe it doesn't have to be divine, but it could be some sort of, like, again, some sort of insight, some sort of discovery that happens to come through there, that along those lines. Maybe we see someone rise to prominence in a certain field. I think about musicians or orators, legal advisors, things along those lines, just thinking about some of the stuff that has to deal with Mercury. So yeah, that's always an interesting one. I think when you combine that Mercury with the Sun, I think this is the clarity that Mercury's been needing for a while. That there's been this uncertainty, and just having to it's been trying to make some sort of sense of this, of where things are going, of who's in charge. Like what's the authorities thinking? What's the king thinking? Those in those kind of higher spheres there. So we could, again, that could even be something where someone in some prominent position maybe makes some kind of speech. I'm looking at that. and I'm looking at the moon. I normally don't bring in the moon on this one, but it's interesting to see where the moon is applying to when this is happening. It's applying to looks like to reverse, probably first to Venus and then to Mars there, just separated from Jupiter. So there's even something I'd be interested to see what happens there. I could get even like a mixed bag to see what kind of news comes up there. But that's basically the Kazemi. We're talking about that's happening in Taurus. And then we have another Mercury ingress that's going to be happening. Mercury will enter into Gemini on the 17th, and that's going to happen at about 3:26 a.m. Pacific time. Now, with Mercury in Gemini, we're going to do like we did when it entered into Taurus. You want to see what house you have Gemini in. So, for example, with this chart here, if you have Pisces rising, Mercury is getting ready to enter into your fourth house, which can deal with like your family, your parents, your home. It can deal with kind of like more kind of secretive matters or more kind of personal matters. But those would be some basic family or some things that come up with that. Will come up with that. So you may be some things that have come up around there. Maybe some topics there to pay attention to. But you want to see again where Gemini is in your chart, but how does it aspect your time lords, for example. So to just bring in my chart because it's an easy one to talk about. This is going to be where Mercury is going to form a lot of sextiles in my chart. It's going to trine Saturn. Love that. Love that. It's trine Saturn. Then sextile with all my Leo placements. It'll conjunct my moon placement actually first off. So that'll be something because I have moon at 0 degrees of Gemini. So it'll actually be applying from within Taurus. But it's another Gemini's not quite as busy as let's say like Aries or Taurus, but similar to Taurus is there's a that sort of busyness that happens. There's a more active time, a more harmonious time with those sextiles that are happening there. So I'm definitely going to try to make the most of that. Talk with some friends, something along those lines, setting up some plans, whatever that might be. Thinking about my hopes and dreams. Hopefully connecting with some other people, maybe some more patrons, things like that. Making maybe some more connections like that. But those would be ways that if you want to think about how to approach your chart and how the topic. So this fourth house, you could be thinking about things that you want to do with your home. Maybe you want to start doing more stuff with your family. Maybe you want to start a family. You want to plant roots. Things maybe you want to think about moving. You want to change your home space or something like that. Fourth house could deal with religious matters. Maybe there's something that's going on. Thinking about your faith that can be going on there. Something that you've been contemplating. So those would be just some ways to navigate that. But when you get the lay of the land here, Mercury's going to be co-present with Venus just for a little bit, but it's in its domicile, which is great. It's at home. It's had a pretty rough trek since it was last in a place of the last time it was in a place of dignity was when it was in, at least by sign, was in Virgo. So because Mercury only really gets those, it's not like the other planets that have like 3 places that they celebrate in. Mercury only gets the 2, like the sun and the moon do, which is something which I actually never thought about before. But yeah, so Mercury's had a pretty tough trek through this period of time there. So this is a nice place for Mercury to be at home, to be in a place where it can actually just think, where it can function, where it can do its thing and do its thing well, to get stuff back on track, to problem solve, to innovate, to do all those mercurial things. So to refine, to practice, and something I wanted to bring up too. Mercury was thought of as, there's a strong thing with it being like the interpreter of the heavens. And so this would be even a great time to even do some study with like astrology. I would think with Mercury being in Gemini, it'd be a good one for that. It could be good for him just for doing some general learning, some things in general. I find it's a flexible mind, I think, when Mercury is in Gemini there, able to see from a number of perspectives when we think about that. So that's going to be a good one for Mercury to move into. Now, we're not done with the ingresses, because let me see who's the next one that's moving. Mars is going to be moving. So we got Mars here. That's going to happen on the 18th of May at about 3:25 p.m. Pacific time. Now, this is where we're just like we looked at with Taurus, all of those themes that applied when we're talking with Taurus. Now, one of the malefics is moving there now, and so we're thinking about Mars, and this is where Mars is in one of its like it's in its exile. It's in the state of where it's opposite one of its domiciles of Scorpio here. So Mars is furthest away from home. It has some bounds in Taurus at the end degrees of that in Taurus, but through that period of time, like Mars doesn't have any particular dignity here. So you want to see how Mars is aspecting your planets from Taurus. Is this going to be, because now when it was Mercury going through there, those squares, like sure there may be some Mercury, but it's Mercury that's going through there. Mercury's more tend to be more of a neutral planet. Mars is one of the malefics, so now this is one I'm going to be watching out for, because this is where Mars is going to square all of my Leo placements as well as my Saturn and Aquarius, going to conjunct the midheaven, and it's not all, again, it's not maybe all bad. I'm going to try to use that to put a little more energy behind what I'm maybe doing with the stuff that I'm doing, but maybe there might be some ways that Mars might be impeding on that in some sort of way. This could be comes to square my ascendant, could come down with a cold, could come down whatever that happens to be. But the aspect starts now when we're thinking about that, and this is where Mars is going to be traveling for a number of weeks. Mars won't enter into Gemini until the 28th of June, so we got a month and 10 we got yeah about a month and 10 days of Mars in Taurus that we're going to be navigating through here. So for this period of time, be thinking about where you have Taurus, how does that aspect, because this could be where Mars is maybe forming a bunch of trines, and maybe there's a bunch of movement that's happening to like the Virgo or the Capricorn portion of your chart. But you want to pay attention if you have Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius. This is going to be forming more harder aspects, just like when Mercury was moving through those. I should have mentioned that too, when Mercury was moving through there. And then with Mercury moving through Gemini, let me backtrack a little bit. You want to pay attention if you have a lot of placements in the mutable signs. That's going to be Gemini, Virgo, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces. And especially if Mercury is a time lord and you have a lot of mutable, that's going to be a more active period of time for you. So something you can kind of tune into to get a feel for what that's going to look like. So that's going to be that first ingress. So you want to watch that. But when you look at Mars's time through there, because what did I say, through the 28th, it's actually going to get to form that it's not going to do a whole bunch in Taurus. It's actually going to be pretty quiet. It'll have a sextile with Venus at some point while it's in Taurus, because Venus is applying to Saturn, or excuse me, to Mars, as we're actually watching this, is applying as we speak. It's within orb here. And then it's going to have a sextile with Jupiter. So Mars is actually in a little bit of a better place here. It'll have reception with its domicile lord when Venus moves into Cancer. So that'll actually be really nice. So this is actually a better place for Mars to be in, as far as like from a martial standpoint, if we're going to talk about that, before more maybe positive significators of Mars to show up, now that it's not co-present with Saturn. Because even though that was a place where it was its domicile, it still had the other malefic there. So there was this trouble that was still brewing up, this fusion of those malefic energies that were coming to there, because you got Mars who's at home and Saturn who hates it here. And so that's a mixed place to be, when you're navigating how the different stuff can feel. So yeah, that's going to be Mars in Taurus. Now the next aspect, this is all going to be on the same day too, because we have, next one is going to be Venus is going to enter into Cancer, and that's going to happen at about 6:05 p.m. Pacific time. This is still on the 18th. And so now this brings attention to the Cancer portion of our chart, which is getting a lot of love here. Now, this happened. I'm actually so excited to see Venus and Jupiter here. They were there last year, and I got to see that conjunction that was happening in the sky. Man, that's a sight. If you can get out there while the sun is still, you'll have to see them setting in this instance to get out there. But that's something, as Venus gets closer to Jupiter, if you can kind of try to catch that, because we're getting to where, again, Jupiter will be going under the beams here before we know it, and Big Papa will be out of view for a sec. So just even just on an astronomical point, definitely go check that out. That's super cool to see. But Venus entering into Cancer. We want to see what part we have Cancer in our chart, because now Venus is going to bring some loveliness is there. Now the benefic is coming through there to do some good in there, and you're going to want to see how Venus is aspecting again the Time Lords that are activated for you this year. See how that's going for you, and then pay attention to Venus is a Time Lord. If you have any placements in the cardinal signs, that's going to be Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, or Aries. Venus is going to be working more actively with you, be working more actively with you. And then even pay attention to, you got like trines that's going to be in Scorpio and Pisces. That's going to be bring a lot of ease there, some benefits even to the earth parts. That's Virgo and Taurus. Venus is bringing a lot of ease there. So that's something to see. Again, what topic is that? Is Venus trying to bring some relief in, trying to bring that connection, trying to bring that beneficence, some love, some desire, some creativity, some areas where you want to nurture that more, where some gifts maybe come in. This could be, for example, looking at this, so let's say you got Libra rising, Venus coming in here, maybe there's some kind of promotion that's happening. Maybe you feel more inspired to do some sort of thing. You want to your taste for what you want to do changes, or maybe you want to maybe do some sort of like maybe make some kind of connections to help you someone get you to where you want to be. So that could be a great way of working with both the benefics traveling there. That's good. Yeah, that's really good. I like a Venus. I like Venus in Cancer. It got some balance here. It's one of the triplicity lords, and that's something too. Mars is like the if I'm remembering my triplicities correctly, Mars is the co-ruler, co-lord for the Earth triplicity. And that's just when they think about that. So that's just like a whole separate thing. But Venus, it doesn't do too bad in Cancer. Now look at just in general for Venus. Like I said, it's going to form a sextile with Mars, which we're going to talk about next. It's going to form a square with Saturn, which is not the greatest thing, especially with Saturn being this overcoming position. And it won't do this month, but it's going to form eventually a conjunction with Big Papa. Let me see when that's happening. Let me see when that happens. That happens on the 9th. That won't happen until June. That we have that conjunction with Jupiter, but yeah, that's gonna be a nice one for Venus to have. But it's got to get through that square with Saturn here. But let me bring up the next aspect that Venus is going to be having, because it's going to form. Oops! Went back. Got a little ahead of myself there. We're in November. Hold on, and back to May on the 18th of May. Still on the 18th. We haven't left the 18th yet. At about 10:37 p.m. Yeah, Venus is going to form that sextile with Mars. And when I was thinking about that, one real fascinating thing is Mars and Venus have this, both share that significator of marriage that they have. So that could even be something with them being in a more harmonious aspect, to have this, but where Mars and Venus is like it's a more easier testimony that those two are sharing, where Mars and Venus are viewing each other in a more sympathetic way. This could be where you maybe see some sort of like, again, like some sort of like marriages that are coming up there, some sort of unions that potentially happen. This could be, again, Venus, like Jupiter, kind of gives that idea of promotion, bestows offices of like supervisors and things like that. So we can maybe see that leadership of Mars maybe coming into to some sort of rank. We could see maybe some, again, opportunity for some sort of like maybe prominent female person to come into some sort of prominence, or take some sort of role there. And this could be maybe in like music. This could be in something along those lines. I'm trying to think what else that combination kind of gives me. This gives a very kind of similar sort of like inspired sort of view when we think about the desires of Venus and that ability to go act on them. I think that that's something there, that compulsion to want to express oneself. That could be something that we see there, to go appreciate, to go out there and to be energized by the beauty that is the world, that you can kind of find in those little pockets of times. It's doing maybe some. This could be where, oh, I'm even gotta like even thinking something maybe with sports that happens. Maybe there's some sort of victory that happens. Someone maybe breaks like a streak or some sort of thing like that. It's just something that just kind of popped into my mind there. Some sort of innovators, inventors, some sort of master craftsmen, maybe kind of coming into some sort of kind of maybe some kind of prominence there. But this can be, it's a very, it can be a sexual energy as well. So that's something that you can maybe see that, in the Venusian energy, maybe time to go out on a date, and not necessarily just for that, but just for like romance could be in the air. Do something fun, something lovely, love affairs. I think about like Mars dealing with like that. So that could be something maybe going. Mars could deal with wandering, so just kind of wandering around, appreciating the Venusian things in life. It could be some ways that you can maybe see that sextile kind of coming up there. But this could be, maybe even some kind of like where there, if there were any sort of like quarrels that the Marshall thing can bring up, there could be some sort of reconciliation that could potentially happen there. I could see that is something that could come up there. So feeling, having a restored maybe sense of hope, with Venus bringing in some sort of that. So that's something, where you lose something and then another thing comes in and fills that space, and it comes to be better than you had even expected to do. And it's never quite the same, but it's like it's still a good kind of consolation prize in a sense. So yeah, that's an interesting one with that Venus sextile there. But that's the 18th. We'll finally get out of that one. Now let's go and get to the next transit here, which is going to be the sun entering into Gemini. And for those of you who have your sun in Gemini, happy birthday, it's your birthday, and we're living it up. And we're jamming. I'm trying to switch up because I think that's always my go-to melody. So I'll have to work on that. I have to get innovative for Gemini season. Gemini! But there's that for you. But yes, it's Gemini season, or it'll be on the 20th. And that's going to happen. Let me switch back over now. That'll happen specifically at about at 5:36 p.m. Pacific time in 45 seconds if we want to be hella accurate. And when we get the lay of the land here, this is not bad for the sun. It moves out of the view of the testimony of Mars, so that's kind of nice. It has a sex. It moves. Not seen by the benefics either, so that's kind of a mixed bag. But it's a kind of a quieter time for the sun when I'm really kind of looking at that. It really is only gonna. It's already had its Kazemi with Mercury. So the only one that is going to be applying to is going to be a sextile with Saturn while it's in its time in Gemini. So this is kind of a quieter one for the place for the sun to be in when we're really kind of looking at that. It'll be co-present with its ruler while Mercury's starting to, it's picking up speed right now, but it'll start slowing down once Mercury enters into Cancer, but that won't be until next month. So it's co-present with its ruler, with its domicile lord, so that's good. We know we like that. That's some clarity there. But this is again where you want to look to see where you have Gemini in your chart. What topics does that have to deal with? How does that aspect the Lord or lords of the year for you? If you're working with like annual perfections, for example, like that's one of the techniques that I like to use, or that I like to work with. And how's that going to be aspecting things? And especially if you want to pay attention to, especially if the sun is a time lord, and if it's going to be, because it's going to be aspecting those mutable placements in a more kind of hard, like a more with the conjunctions, with the squares and oppositions, that you want to pay attention to Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces again, like we did with Mercury, because the sun may be working more actively with you. And those solar aspects, when you think about the sun applying to things, when you want to navigate that, again, the sun is that sense of the will, that if you want to just on a personal level, that kind of higher mind, that sense of authority, that recognition, the yeah, the nature's fire, the fire that's fueling the light in the body. That you see that when we talk about the light in someone's eyes. That's what I think about with that sun, that inner fire. And so you could see, this is one where if the sun is maybe forming more harsher aspects, more harder aspects, that maybe there could be some things that are challenging the will. Maybe they haven't been able to get enough sleep. Maybe there's been some things that are going on outside of you. Maybe some stress from friends, or some stress from work, from family, from your environment, whatever that happens to look like. And there could be ways of that could be how to navigate those kind of solar transits, because I know those can sometimes, when you go to describe those could feel a bit more kind of abstract, and kind of, again, we're talking about that divine mind, but that's the sun. That sort of thing that's coming through there, and it's a part that is it's an integral to this experience. So yeah, those would be some ways that I would navigate that. Like, again, for example, for me, this is Gemini's gonna conjunct my moon. So that'd be cool. I might probably do a little I Ching pull on that one. It's going to conjunct my moon. It'll form sextile with all my Leo placements, trine Saturn. So that's really nice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the sun going through there. Gemini season is usually a pretty chill time for me. Usually some stuff where it's like stuff with that's my 11th house. So there's usually some stuff that's going on with my friends. I might even think about some. There's been this group thing that I've been thinking about. Maybe I'll do it. We'll see. I'm waiting too long. So we'll see. That's just that's my personal shenanigans. But again, this just I hope that this, like, kind of bringing my chart into the mix would kind of help you to see it, where, like, for example, with this one, let's say if you have Libra rising, it's entering into your ninth house, so this would be really great for mystical matters, doing some meditations for travel. Maybe we'll happen to do some travel for something along those lines. That could deal with doing some kind of like doing some sort of learning, some sort of education. Can be some things that are going on, that could potentially happen. And with that, especially Mercury there too, the clarity, the insights, could be really good for that. Could be a really, really good time for that astrology. So, where you're here. So you're doing it. But yeah, that could be something with that sun in Gemini. And then if you have your sun in Gemini, this is a solar return for you. This is going to be one where you want to see what timelines are going to be activated for you for the year, because those are going to be changing. Different topics are going to be coming up to view there. So definitely tune into that. And again, if you have any questions about that, and you want to book a consultation, all that stuff, my stuff is down in the description box below. Now let's get to the next aspect here, which, again, another one of our series of sextiles. We have Mercury that's going to be forming a sextile with Saturn. Now that's going to come to completion on May 22nd at about 11:02 a.m. Pacific time. And you think about that, this gives me, I think about Saturn sometimes, and that ability, that discipline aspect of Saturn, that ability to focus, and the austerity that comes with that, and even sometimes of that solitary aspect of it. That times of take some time to do some deep thinking, to challenge the mind, to I've been listening to these lectures by Robert Schmidt for about a month now, and I mean it's been really cool stuff. It's been very useful information. It's breathed into some life my appreciation for just like language, and just like how I'm even just thinking about and it's still forming. Yeah, that's it's always, every time I'm listening to this stuff, I can feel and tell when I'm talking about it, how I'm like integrating these new thoughts into my astrology, into my everyday. And that's what this gives me. There's this opportunity there to take some of those Saturnian things into have some focus, to build those things, to give something a foundation, to take the reins on some sort of things there, to make some sort of, like, again, some sort of connections. I think that and this, to me, it gives a time to work on some work, and like do some secretive work, but not like secret and like we're up to something, but more so that to do some work again in privacy and solitude, to not have to share it with it, because sometimes when we share something and people may not see the vision, or it's still kind of, it's still a little half baked right now, it's like it can be something that could bring it down, and then we end up feeling a little melancholy and then downtrodden, and then then it's a different way of showing up. But this gives to me, even maybe on a mundane sense, maybe there's a bit more order, maybe even in just like of trade, maybe someone's is there's more better supervision as far as like those sort of mercurial matters, trade, management, coins, finances, the economy, things along those lines. Maybe some new plans are presented. Maybe there's some things that have come up, maybe some resolutions with some sort of like lawsuits. I'm just thinking, for example, with Mars, and even, or not Mars, with Saturn and even Mercury, those representing those kind of legal matters. Maybe some things are coming up with there. Maybe so some sort of progress. There's a better word I'm looking for, but some sort of progress that's made in some sort of like case, that maybe some sort of famous case that's happening there. Maybe this could be where we can even thinking about that, where Saturn is that sort of secretive sort of aspect. This could be maybe even shedding some light, doing some sort of detective work, doing some, now that there's a bit of clarity, we had that Kazemi that's happening. Because it's interesting when this aspect is happening. Mercury's still technically within under the beams of the sun, so there's still some mercurial things that are hitting, but maybe some things are coming to light as far as like something that's been kept secretive for a certain time. Saturn can be like it's deceitful in a way. It's tricky, and now but we're able to discern better. That's what this is giving me, that sort of thing there. So that actually, I'd be really kind of curious to see what sort of things kind of come up there, some sort of like overturnings or something along those lines. Maybe there even see like where there were unjust imprisonments, for example. I think so. Those are some things that I would see with that Mercury sextile Saturn there. That's basically, I think, all I want to talk about with that one. Then we get to the last aspect, or the last configuration of the month here, and that's going to be Venus is going to be in a square configuration with Saturn. That's going to reach its completion at about 8:02 p.m. Pacific time. Now, when you think about this is similar to how when Jupiter and Mars were in that square position. Venus is in the inferior position compared to Saturn, who's in the superior position in this square, and so a lot of those Saturnian influences are coming down on those Venusian aspects. So there's still something that's building up in the background. That's I think of Saturn as just like obstacles in some sort of business. There's still some sort of maybe things that maybe come up with just like unemployment, maybe some things in the job market that are potentially changing up, some things that haven't been necessarily revealed yet, or that are maybe even before they were. Because this, you got to keep in mind too, this is something that's been building for a while since Venus has entered into Cancer. And so this could be, especially as Mercury was starting to get from in the beams and out of the beams, where there could have been some news about maybe a company was going a certain way, gets from under the beams, and we find out that yes, there's going to be this change, and that there may be maybe even a trade of hands with like a maybe again I say prominent female figure just because it's Venus, maybe someone in a status like that happens to be pushed out of power or pushed out of a position, something along those lines. Maybe there's some sort of accusation that's been made. There's something that's generally, when I think about Saturn Venus combination, there's even in something indecent, I think that could potentially, that could maybe come to light. There's some sort of news that's happening there, because Saturn, it can be depraved. There's some thinking about those harder significators with with Saturn, it can be the seeing those relationships that make one miserable, even in a sense. So Saturn Venus squares, that there has been this sort of like betrayal that could potentially happen there. This deceitfulness that shows up maybe in relationships, or maybe there's some sort of like, maybe there's something that shows up in where there, it gives me like tax evasion, or like a fraud or something along those lines that comes up there, where there's some kind of tension that's happening. There's some kind of backlash that comes up. There's some sort of secret that comes up there. Some sort of people getting in with the wrong crowd. You're just something along those lines. And then we got some sort of things coming up that come up there. You can even think too, I think, with Venus Saturn has this idea of like being able to possess. There's a possession that comes over there, a taking over. In Venus, it's a similar thing, but it's those almost like kind of, I think of like a spiritual fervor when one is overcome with desire. How that can one forgets themselves for a moment, and becomes just like a slave to it, almost, in a sense. And and this, it leads to these sort of just weird sort of things, that this almost debaucherous things that come up. I think about with the Venus Mars square, and that's a weird one to kind of, or not Venus Mars, Venus Saturn square, and that's a weird one to kind of end on. This could be where a certain art style isn't received well. Maybe a certain mode of thing is being challenged. Where I think of like when if you remember like Blockbuster, when that was like a thing. I remember there was a Blockbuster on the corner of a place where I grew up, and then as soon as like DVDs and all this and all the other things came out, then they were just all gone. There's a I'm thinking about Venus dealing with like factories and markets. I know a person that was telling me that Aldi is coming in and taking up a lot of places. Has been really expanding, and so we may see some things along those lines, and maybe there's some tensions that are happening there, and how that's infringing on the market. You can even think about that, how that infringes on like even like kind of affects like small businesses, or things along those lines, because a lot of the place that Aldi is moving into, a lot of places had to move out, and the person that was in charge of that managed Saturn, those buildings there, was that made some choices, and that's fine. And there's some other things with that story, but that have very Saturnine things to them. But this could be just like, that would be a good, or at least that would be, I don't know about a good, but that would be an example that I would present for how that could potentially show up there. But it is a tougher one, and I think that when you have those kind of things in coming down, the benefics. One other thing that I think they share is that, again, that relationship building, and it's having those relationships with people that want us to prosper, that want us to flourish, and even looking at those that are ones that are bringing us down, and not even just our friendships, but even the places that we work, maybe the places that we do business, how that affects like our. And that may be something that we see, again, that just kind of changes in the market, like what we value. What are some ways, like, can see where there are obvious constrictions or restraints on goods, maybe even something that's maybe even happening with maybe something with the land that's possibly happening there, or even again something on relationship in terms of sea stuff, when we're thinking about water trades and things like that with Saturn. I'd be curious to see what that, maybe there's some sort of squabble with that, and between people, and then that leads to some sort of thing there. So yeah, that's when I could go in and go you just go in on that. But that's basically how we wrap up. How we wrap up May. Not the greatest ending, but again, it's like in between those times there are these pockets of opportunities for some maybe some order to come back into play. There, Jupiter's trying to do. There's a lot of Jupiter aspects. When I was let me pull up the aspect list again really quick. But yeah, there was a lot of Jupiter in the sky, a little bit of Saturn too. I'd say about equal amounts of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn that's happening there. But yeah, things are changing, and that even to me gives that it's like all the other planets are a little quiet, but I mean not quiet in the sense that they're still applying to stuff, but it's just like who they're applying to. They're applying to these more kind of longer term planets right now. There's a lot of things I think in the background and the foundations that are getting changing, that are getting built up, and we're just trying to get some clarity. And hopefully, again, by the that time of that Kazemi, the Sun Mercury conjunction, we'll have that clarity and have a better idea of where things are going to be moving. But a lot of pieces are going to be moving, especially get towards that middle of the month, around that 17th through the 18th there. So that'll be we'll see some noticeable shifts in our lives and our personal lives, and in the world as well. So that'll be curious to navigate there. But yeah, that's the month of May, the month of May for you. So, yeah, let me know how was April for you. I will say with everything that was going on, I like to do these little recaps at the end. I say with everything that was going on, I personally had a lot of harmonious aspects that were forming in my chart. There were a couple of like I had some like things were squaring my sun. That was the kind of the hardest of it. And as planets were moving through. Let me go back a little bit to April. Let me pull that up really quick on this dynamic chart. But yeah, it wasn't too bad. Things were going to like Pisces and Aries and stuff at that time, and we had a little bit even like Venus starting to enter into Gemini. But that wasn't too bad. I thought that was a nice period. I've been getting some more work done. I've been doing a lot of stuff. My ninth house is just lit up, so like with all that Aries. So that was one that I spent a lot of time doing. I've been just doing just really just deep dive into these lectures by Robert Schmidt, and yeah, just been doing a lot of thinking, and a lot of spiritual work, like not work, but more navigating that space a bit deeper, a bit more thoughtfully than I think I had been. So that's even been a fun sort of personal revelation that I've been coming to my relationship with that divine mind and things like that. So yeah, that's been one I've been navigating, and yeah, it's been cool. I would say overall, and the astrology has been fascinating. It's been I've been appreciating Saturn going through Aries, and I think that it's going to be at least a good one. I think for myself, I think there's going to be some come out on the other side of this, and then figure out what to do with that when Saturn gets into Taurus. I think that'll be the more trickier part. But yeah, that's how I've been thinking about things. That's how the month's been going for me. So yeah, in the comments, tell me how this has been showing up for you. What are some things that you notice? What are some astrological things even in your community, in your just kind of day to day there? I knew when there was that Aries party, yeah, things were active. It was busy. The day of the oh gosh, what was it? It was like the day of the new moon or something along those lines, when someone entered into, I think Mercury just entered into Aries or something like that. There was the cruise ship, so it's starting to get busier where I'm at. So it's like it's a lot of people that are flowing through. So that's been interesting to watch and just kind of navigate, and just to see, yeah, this to watch the astrology come up. I had a very interesting weekend where I got to watch how the moon being enclosed by the benefics just on a mundane sense, and how pleasant that can be. That was a real pleasant pocket, and then when it moved out of that, it was noticeably less pleasant, but like not bad, but just it wasn't as beautiful. So that was even some good notes in that regard. So it's been cool. It's been overall cool. I got some other little things that I'm just kind of navigating there, but yeah, overall not too bad. So we gotta catch up with some friends and all those. I had a lot of people to catch up with. So yeah, that's basically what's been going on with me. I'd love to hear what's going on with you. And this is something, if you want help navigating these transits and see how they're showing up in your chart, down in the description box there's a link to book a consultation with me. My email's down there if you have any questions as far as the services that I provide. There's a couple playlists for the Celestial News Monthly, and I do a weekly videos that break down from the perspective of the moon, and so you can kind of see that as this gives you the broader terms, and then the moon gives you the fine details and kind of navigates each of those each week and how we're navigating each of these configurations. So if that's something that you want to check out, that's there. I have this series of videos too that I talk about different planets in different zodiac signs in different places and how to navigate that. So that's another little series there. And if you go to that and you see, hey, there's some that I haven't done, feel free to comment and let me know, and I just put that one on the queue, and that'll be the next video that I release when I release one. So, and I'll let you know if there are any ahead of you or not, but in around the time I should have it out. But that's all I think I got for you here for the month. We'll see how April. I feel definitely a lot better about April than I than or excuse me, about May than I did April. April was a lot of stuff that was forming there, and it's been and to be when I'm recording this, to be in the thick of it right now. That's been fascinating to see in what ways that I maybe was exaggerated, in some ways that it wasn't. So that's been cool is not the right word, but it's been neat to navigate and to get good notes on this so that we can talk about these things and to be better equipped for whatever's to come. So love that for us. But until next time, stay mindful out there. Keep raising that vibration through the roof, and I will catch you on the next one. Later.